Hey, hey, hey! It's 2023, and this is the first episode of the Mio on MMA podcast for the year. No fight card to break down, nothing to really talk about in terms of that. So, what this is going to be is me talking about these stories that are going on news-wise in MMA right now that, at least for the beginning of the year, are going to frame a lot of discussion. Possibly for the entire year. In some of these cases, I hope it frames the discussion for the entire year because I think it should. I hope your 2022 was great. I hope that you had a good holiday season, whatever that happened to be for you, and a good New Year's Eve and all that. Hopefully you have some goals for the year. Mine, as per usual, will be the weight loss goals. Did not make it in 2022. My goal was 225 pounds. I came in at 235. So I missed by 10 pounds. In my defense, towards the end of the year, I was on pace. I was on pace to make it. But towards the end of the year, picked up a couple of injuries. I am actually more beat up right now, probably, than at any point during my ever so brief flirtation with becoming a mixed martial arts fighter. I have a tear in my right calf, and my left foot has a hairline fracture, and my left knee has a strained ACL. And my ribs are also kind of messed up from an incident over the Christmas break. My sister and I were out walking the dogs, and the dogs gave me the old tripwire routine. They were leash-free but leashed together, essentially. Came running up behind me, and whoop, the leash caught my legs. My legs went out from under me, and down I went. So that's been a little bit problematic. If I'm wheezing a little bit, if I seem a little short on breath, that's why. There's nothing significantly wrong. Nothing. I did go to the hospital this week to get it checked out because it was hurting a lot, but nothing really came of it. It's injured. My lungs are not fully inflating as my body protects itself from where the ribs are kind of a little bit damaged. And that does mean that I am running out of oxygen a little bit quicker than I'm supposed to. But aside from that, it's going to heal. It's not a problem. Moving on. And when I say moving on, I mean we're moving on to my topics for this. I have, how many topics do I even have here? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stories that I think are going to define the year. And I do have one question from a viewer that I am going to break down as well, if I have time. We know I like to keep this like around an hour and not terribly much more. I have to open up with a political disclaimer here. So, okay. Some of the topics I'm going to be talking about, and I'll probably group them towards the beginning, are going to come off as political or just not liking people who have different views on the world than I do. And here's the thing. That is never something I'm going to critique. Because here's the thing. Mixed martial arts is loaded with people that do not have similar political sensibilities to myself. I long ago made peace with that fact and moved on from it. I will not hate a fighter, a promoter, a manager, a coach, etc., just because of their voting history or their left-right political alignment. I don't do that. I would have to hate some fighters I actually really enjoy. The great example I can give is Josh the Punk Thompson. Now, Josh Thompson, I have known since way back in the UFC 40 era, was a right-winger. He at that point was publicly a Republican. At no point did I really say anything about it. You can check the old videos. You can check the podcast. You will not hear me talk about Josh Thompson during his fighting career on any real kind of negative level. There will be picks against him and stuff. There will be talks about how the fight is not necessarily to his advantageous, is not advantageous to him. There you go. But At no point will you see me run him down or have a hate speech or have a hate on for him. This despite knowing that we probably agree on very little, politically speaking. And that he has some opinions that I really, really, really probably disagree with. And we know that now. The hate has come after his retirement, becoming a commentator, because he's bad at it. I don't enjoy him as a Bellator commentator. Like, that's as far, that's where the hate has come from. It has nothing to do with like, oh, I just suddenly discovered that he was a Republican. No. I have known for a very, 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 very long time that the political views of Josh Thompson are not something I agree with. And conversely, someone like Tyron Woodley, who probably actually I do have a lot in common with on a political level, probably, realistically speaking, never really much of a fan of him as a fighter. Kind of found him boring. Found him utterly frustrating because he had a style of fighting that was, number one, not super exciting. Number two, not super effective. Not efficient. Not optimal. That he would allow fights to sneak away on him a lot, and it frustrated me to no end. And the only people I've ever called out, like on a political level, I get that people think I dislike Colby Covington because of his politics, for example. I dislike Colby Covington because his politics has become a gimmick, a professional wrestling style gimmick, and I think he's bad at it. Like, I enjoyed the Chael Sonnen gimmick for the quick-wittedness and the charm and the charisma, despite disagreeing with anything of its substance. But with Covington, it's just bad. Like, I knew, for example, Covington was a right-wing leaning person before he did that, and I had no problem with him up until that point. And I think I talked about George Masvidal a little bit, just because it's a bit weird that George Masvidal is such a big supporter of anti-immigration politicians and law and order, stringent black and white law and order types, because that just seems to not really suit his lifestyle. Honestly, like, full stop. I feel like if George Masvidal actually got what he politically expresses a desire to have, I don't think he'd be happy with it. So there's a certain paradoxical nature there. And yeah, you're allowed to have any opinion. But here's the thing. Here's the thing about opinions. You're allowed to have an opinion. I'm allowed to think, and thereby have an opinion, that your opinion sucks. That's the key. I think I literally had to use that on somebody who was... I jumped into a conversation on a Jack Slack thread about a guy broke down and like basically went with the, oh, so I'm not allowed to have an opinion argument. And it's like, oh yeah, no, you can have an opinion. No one's suppressing your right to have that opinion or even express that opinion, because he was just talking about like mixed martial arts stuff. No one's going to suppress that opinion. It doesn't make it like not correct. Like, for example, I thought Jake Matthews had turned a corner when he beat Andre Fiallo, and we were going to be looking at a rise of Jake Matthews. I was wrong. If you want to express the opinion that I was horrendously wrong and completely out to lunch with that, please feel free, because I was. So this is not a political thing. It's about action. It's about things that were done and things that are being done. There. Okay. We're going to talk about Dana White slapping his wife. So here's the thing. I'm actually going to credit, I'm going to say some nice things about Dana White here at the start. And what I'm going to say about Dana White is that in his TMZ interview, now granted, soft interview, softest interview anyone's ever going to get on this topic, he rejected opportunities to make excuses beyond the fact that they were both drinking. And he offered no defense. That what he did was wrong, was terrible, etc. That is more than I thought we'd get. Honestly, I thought he would somehow try to navigate this in a smokescreen fashion, and he did not. I actually appreciate that. Now, does that mean he shouldn't face some kind of penance? No, he absolutely should. To be clear, I don't think anything's going to happen off this. So far, Dana White's punishment for slapping his wife has been that power slap. The Dana White power slap lead has been postponed for a week. I think it was moved from January 11th to January 18th in terms of debut. And I think there was some conversation about just canceling it all together. That is the mistake. Or that is the punishment, I should say. He's not getting fired. He's not being suspended, as far as we know so far. He's not facing any kind of payment problem. And he's not even being forced to donate some cash to domestic abuse outreach programs, etc., awareness programs, and all that kind of thing. So there's honestly nothing being done here. So everyone who's got the hashtag Free Dana can scrag right off, because there's nothing to free him from. There's no consequence going on here. The fighter defense, and also I'm going to say some nice things about Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith wrote him down in an article, and I never thought I'd agree with Stephen A. Smith on like anything, but he's completely right. This is the thing: is Dana White has in the past said you do not come back from putting your hands on a woman. Now, granted, his actions have never actually supported that, because if we look at the history of UFC and domestic violence accusations, charges, and even people found incredibly guilty, your star has always affected how it's handled. You look at Greg Hardy, we signed him with a very public domestic abuse charge. Anthony Johnson has a lot of history there. You have a lot with John Jones, obviously, signed to Anthony Lapsley, with a conviction for it. Michael Graves, I believe, and Abel Trujillo also had convictions for domestic abuse before signing with the UFC. Luis Pena, during his time with the company. Will Chope had a domestic... Now, I will make a brief statement here. There is every indication that they didn't know about Will Chope's thing, because his domestic violence abuse allegation really just got him released, dishonorably discharged from the armed forces. As far as I can tell, there was no legal proceeding on the matter. And there's also Tyler East. There's a lot of them. And the thing is, if you're a very small star, yes, the UFC releases you. Will Chope got released like that when the news came out. But Abel Trujillo fought for the better part of a decade after his charges. John Jones is still employed by the company. Anthony Rumble Johnson was never really cut because of it. Greg Hardy, again, the Greg Hardy one was super weird, because they the mixed messaging on that one was horrible. So I mean, I guess it's consistent with the UFC. They view Dana White as a big star, therefore nothing will come of this. He's going to be treated like John Jones, not like Will Chope. But what I really want to talk about here, because again, I actually think that Dana White's interview was as good as anyone really should have expected. And obviously, we know that the UFC is not going to really punish Dana White unless there is a financial incentive. But the defense of Dana White is, to me, concerning. One, there are people who are suggesting that the UFC would sink and burn. The ship would go under without Dana White. It's $1 billion corporation, guys. And Dana White has admitted that he's taking a less active role in the company. That he's, pursuing the power slap thing and so on. And he's looking for other ventures. Howlerhead. I don't know if you call it the liquor, the booze, whatever the technical terminology for it is. There's a lot of this idea that, like, the idea that Dana White getting suspended or fired would tremendously do anything to the UFC is just incorrect. There is definitely a succession plan of some kind in place. There is definitely some designated people who would take his roles up. I don't know who they would be. I think it used to be Dave Scholler, but I don't think he's with the company anymore. And it would be fine. It would be fine. Yes, things like Dana White Contender Series would need a renaming, and maybe there would be less of a hype for it. But the company would roll on. The company absolutely would roll on. And the idea that Dana White is owed anything for the formation of the UFC and where it is ridiculous. That's not to say that he has not done anything. I want to be clear. Dana White is a tremendous part of why the UFC is what it is, for better or worse. But here's the thing about that. He also became a billionaire. His compensation for his time, his expertise, and his helping to build the company is the fact that he has generational wealth in a relatively short period of time. Multiple mansions, one mansion that has like 9 pools, and he's not a swimmer. There's one of his properties has a go-kart course on it. He has been compensated. And it's a similar thing to like an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos. It's the whole like, we owe these people as job creators thing. No, we don't. The owing was that they got rich off of it. There you go. And the reaction from the fighters and like some fans has just been terrible. Because you have people, and this has happened almost on any topic when it comes to UFC. Because take fighter pay, for example, because I've been in the trenches of that fight. This is not going to be a long fighter pay rant. But the stance would be is like you would quote from UFC, Endeavor financial documents or the UFC antitrust lawsuit. Numbers the UFC has provided in terms of compensation towards fighters. And people would be like, that's wrong. And it's like, so you're questioning Dana and the UFC while defending Dana and the UFC. And the same thing is happening here because you have Dana saying there is no excuse, there is no defense. I was in the wrong. I created this situation. I am essentially a piece of crap. And you have people going all the way out of their way to talk about like, no. She started this. She is at fault here. She should have known her place. She should be a classy lady, and that was not classy. It's kind of weird because, like, I feel like these guys, like Jamal Hill or Aljamain Sterling, are trying to score points with Dana. And I'm legitimately wondering if that's going to horrendously backslide because you're also insulting his wife. It's pretty terrible to watch. And I'll finish up with talking about the incident itself. Let us be blunt here. He started it based on what we saw. He said something to her that upset her. She honestly looks upset at the beginning of the video. Like, it doesn't look like she's a terribly happy person right from the start. He's upset her. She turns to leave. He grabs her, restrains her. She slaps him. The slap is escalation. I will concede that. But it is not starting the problem. We don't truthfully know what started the problem, I suppose, because the problem appears to be ongoing from the beginning of the video. Like, it already has started. But based on what we saw, Dana White created the physical element of it, has admitted, again, Dana's words, that he is the instigating factor here, and that his wife is not. Yet people are really trying to defend him by talking about what the wife did that started this whole thing, which is ridiculous. Again. Slapping your husband, not cool. But slapping your wife back twice, I might add twice versus one, is wrong. And the whole concept of equality and people using that as a way to defend this is also ridiculous because here is the thing. Let's take the gender away for a moment. Let's take a man about the size of Ann White, Dana's wife, and have Dana slap that man. It would still be wrong because there is a power imbalance in the situation. I mean, there is a reason that in MMA you have weight classes. There's a reason that some of the very people who are trying to defend this on the grounds of equality also don't want trans men fighting women. Because there is perceived power imbalances there. So that's a ridiculous argument as well. And I'll finally finish this up with like, people are like, oh, what should happen to Ann White? Why would I have an opinion of what should happen to Ann White? Like, this is the thing is, I now know what she does for a living because I Googled it. But prior to that, I didn't know the company she works for. I didn't know what she did for the company. What does my opinion, what would my thoughts on what should happen to her professionally matter? Because guess what? The company she works for gets $0 of my dollars already. Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to give you $0 still? Like, if they fire her, I'm still giving $0. If they keep her on, I'm still giving her $0. There is no action required there. And from a legal standpoint, Dana's not pressing charges. So there's nothing to discuss there. It's not in our realm to impact. It's not in our realm to have any real input on, because it's not something we know. It's like what would be a good example? What would be a really good example? Okay, here we go. There is a Chinese takeout place up the road from me. I never go there. Not a big fan of their food. If their owner got caught doing something, my opinion on it wouldn't matter. I'm not a customer. I'm not a consumer. It would be like up to the legal system to do whatever it was going to do. Like, that's the thing as far as his wife is concerned. Unless you had some relationship as a consumer with the company that she works for, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We do have that consumer relationship with the UFC, with ESPN, etc. And the fact that ESPN is even refusing to comment on it is just sad and transparent. And something should happen. The punishment should not be power slap is delayed and you had to do a TMZ interview. And of course, this is also terribly timed because Phil Baroni also may allegedly have beaten his ex-girlfriend to death. And there's a study that shows like MMA has 2 times the domestic violence rate of normal Americans. So this is an obvious problem within the sport. This is an obvious thing. We had Josh Grisby some time ago. I didn't even mention him. Brian Bowles, Alexander Emelianenko. Like, there is no shortage of horror stories here. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. I'm going to talk more about that because we're going to talk about Andrew Tate later. But let's talk about Kadyrov, Ramazan Kadyrov, Chechen warlord, head of state, dictator, essentially. And this is not new. He has been using MMA as a political tool for like a really, really long time. And people would be like, why am I not talking about left-wing people when it comes to this? I can't think of any of them that are actually using this. Like, there were a couple of Bernie Sanders endorsements in MMA, but like the closest thing was like Bernie did a spot on Joe Rogan. Like, that was the closest thing to like a left-wing outreach. It tends to be right-wing, relatively authoritarians that bring the political edge into the sport. Here's the thing. Whenever you say something bad about Kadyrov, almost everyone's response will be like, well, ex-US president or presidents or the history of the United States is terrible. Here is the thing. There is a difference between living in a country and voting and like actually doing political sports washing for a dictator. And that is what is being done here. And I have a mixed feelings when it comes to like the Dagestanis and Chechens who are sucked into it, because I don't know. I don't know what would happen to their families. I don't know what I would do in that situation. It's a messed up situation that they have to be it Khamzat Chimaev wrestling with the dictator and letting him win. A couple of MMA fighters were there applauding when he was doing the worst push-ups ever on stage, and going to his son's birthday party. It's a tough one. Now, when it comes to Abdil Karim Elaf, who passed away, probably for displeasing Kadyrov, if we're honest, based on the media coverage within Chechnya. That's a different story, because that man was very, very involved with everything that Chechnya is doing. That's going over. That's active participation in a oppressive government. And then, of course, the Americans, Justin Gaethje, Henry Cejudo, Frankie Edgar, for being not American, Kamaru Usman, etc., who go over there and take money to sports wash for him. It's terrible. It's terrible. And it should actually legitimately have consequences, because here's the thing. America has sanctions against Chechnya and Kadyrov. And that's the thing, is just from a legal point of view, this should be a story. This should be something. And credit to Sean O'Malley, of all people, for turning the money down and not going to the birthday party of a dictator's kid. That shouldn't be a hero moment, but it actually is. And that's bizarre. It's bizarre. Another unlikely hero in these stories. Let's get to Andrew Tate. Here's the thing. Andrew Tate has been accused of sex trafficking, forcible confinement, amongst a slew of, comparatively speaking, minor charges. Now, there has been a story out there that it's mostly about tax evasion. I have not seen that accompanied by any like legal documentation from law enforcement, whereas the sex trafficking or the human trafficking charges do actually have proper citations from the Romanian law enforcement. So I am going with that one. I am going with that is the charge, until somebody can present to me a counter document on the matter of some official creed, as opposed to just like a statement from Team Tate. I have never personally found Andrew Tate at all appealing. And I've honestly I'm kind of confused as to why he has it, because I understand certain self-help gurus, regardless of political affiliation, regardless whatever. Some of them I've never found them particularly useful, but like the hook was obvious to me, is like, why does this work? With Tate, I never got it, because it's just like, I'm going to teach you to be rich and get the ladies. But how I'm rich is teaching you to get rich and get ladies. How I get ladies, I will explain, is by lying and manipulating them. And even in his own in an interview, one of his own videos, he explains how he created his webcam business and how he manipulates the women based on them being dumb and so on to be a part of it, which will probably be used in the legal proceedings against him. I don't know how you can watch this stuff and think that there's any value. I don't honestly get it. And the fact that fighters like Aljamain Sterling, Kelvin Gastelum, Jake Shields, and Leon Edwards are essentially in bed with this is deeply depressing. It's deeply troubling. And they haven't even distanced themselves after he got charged. They haven't even They haven't even had the courtesy to backpedal, basically, post this. And again, there are people defending this. Here's the thing. If your stance is Andrew Tate is innocent until proven guilty, we don't have a problem. We truly don't. If the legal process goes through and nothing happens, I'm not going to get worked up over it. I do think he's guilty. I don't know he's guilty. But there are people making all kinds of excuses. And my personal favorite one is like, oh no, everything he does is for comedy, man. Bro, it's all comedy. What's the comedy? The comedy is misogyny. I fail to see the humor. And I to be honest, I fail to see how that's better. I fail to see how the Andrew Tate bit being comedy is actually better or less damning. I hope he's not doing anything, because someone did point out, and this actually struck a chord. Those of us, those who are hoping that he ends up being guilty, are hoping there are victims, and that's a little bit trashy. That's a little bit problematic. The only problem is, I think there are victims. I think it's unequivocal that there are victims. There are people being forced to do things that they don't want to do. And the question is, to what degree is that a legal problem? What degree is that a crime? As opposed to any idea that this is a complete hoax. Because again, he admits this in videos that are available online. You can find it. And of course, the crack about a great percentage of why he moves to Romania is to avoid prosecution for sex crimes. If you're consuming this guy's stuff and you find him insightful, I'd love to have a conversation about it, because I don't understand it. And people have tried. People have tried it, but they tend to be incredibly vague about it. Like, one guy was just like, he's trying to get people out of the matrix, man. He's trying to break the mainstream view of the world. I'm like, how? Also, I mean, he's a rich guy who's using TikTok and stuff. Like, he is kind of part of the mainstream. So I don't even really understand how that's working. Anyways, I legitimately would love to have a conversation about this. It's sad that I would like to have it, because honestly, I don't understand why this is a thing. But if someone wants to try, I'd love to hear it. Anyways, all right, let's move on to the good stuff. The UFC is really becoming a very open place for talent. I can't recall a time in recent memory where I have been so excited for title fights at so many different divisions. Because there were times where the UFC were during GSP, Anderson Silva, John Jones, and others, where the champions just seemed like they were so far above the rest of the competition. But we have had the following title changes this year. We've had new champs in Yuri Prochazka, Alex Pereira, Leon Edwards, Islam Makhachev, Brandon Moreno, and Davey Figgs have changed the title back and forth. Carlos Barza and Weili Zhang. That's fantastic. That's got to be one of the highest totals in the history of the UFC. In fact, let's look it up. I should have had this handy, but let's have a look here. List of UFC champions crowned in 2022 included everyone I just mentioned right there. So Prochazka, 1, 2, Pereira, 3, Leon Edwards, 4, Islam Makhachev, 5, Figueiredo and Moreno would be 6. And then 7, you have Esparza, and then 8 would be Weili Zhang. For comparison purposes, let's see how many there were in 2021, because I feel like 2021 was also a pretty good year for this. So in 2021, you had Francis Ngannou. I'm not counting the interim Cyril Gane title win. I'm not counting interns in general. Cyril Gane, Glover Teixeira, 2. Charles Oliveira, 3. 4 would have been Aljamain Sterling. 5, Moreno. 6, Pena. 7, Rose. Okay, so there's only one more than there was in 2021. But 2021, I think, is also high mark. Just like looking at the years here, I'm not really seeing anything that's probably terribly close. So you're seeing more and more, at least in my opinion, interesting things. And the thing is that if you told me that any UFC title was going to change hands in 2023, I'd probably believe you. I'd probably be the only exception would be like Amanda Nunes' a stranglehold on featherweight, but like, and Francis Ngannou at heavyweight, assuming he stays with the company. But like, obviously, you have a vacant 205 title. Somebody's going to win that. If Alex Pereira lost the 185-pound title, wouldn't be shocked. And wouldn't be shocked to a number of different people. Wouldn't be shocked about Leon Edwards losing 170 to a number of different people. Would not be shocked if Islam Makhachev lost 155. I'd be shocked if Volkanovski lost the 145 belt in the cage. There is a chance I think he ends up getting stripped. Because if he wins, let's say he wins the 155-pound title. And I'm not picking him to do that. But let's say he does. He's going to have to vacate 145. And then 135 is wide open. Flyweight is pretty open. And then in the women's weight classes, Valentina is still very much has a chokehold on flyweight, but it's getting closer. Flyweight is one of the more interesting. Like a lot of newcomers to flyweight, making stamps, making great improvements, and looking bright for the future. And then strawweight, tons of options. In fact, I'm going to talk about a strawweight return that I don't have on my list here, but I really should have. And this has also been a great year for UFC newcomers and rookies. We have seen the debut of Jack Della Maddalena, Jailton Almeida, Mohamed Mokaev, Tetsuya Taira, Yasmin Hauergui, Natalia Silva, Michael Morales, Raul Rosas Jr., and all of those look like they have very, very bright futures. Jack Della Maddalena came in, beat Pete Rodriguez, beat Roberts in the first round, or all in the first round. To be clear, his fight with Randy Brown, I think, is going to be the first time we're really going to see where he fits. But he beat some reasonably good fighters in Ameev and Roberts and made it look very, very easy in the process of doing it. And then you have Jailton Almeida. He comes in, he beats Parker Porter, he beats Danilo Marquez, he beats Parker Porter, he beats Anton Trinaldo. Again, not necessarily the best fighters, but again, 3 first-round stoppages in his rookie year. He looks really good. Mohamed Mokaev, a bit of a weirder one. Like the Cody Durden win was really, really good, but the Charles Johnson and Malcolm Gordon fights kind of have reduced my hype with him. But he's still super young. He still has some things to build on. There's a lot to work with there, and I do think he's going to be good. I do think he needs to stop talking about being the youngest champion ever, because I think there's a much longer process ahead of him than that. And he's not in a weight class where you can do that. Flyweight is just, it's too deep, and the top of the division is a little too good. And then Tetsuya Taira, who I had a lot of worries about, but honestly, came in and looked very good against Carlos Candelario, very good against CJ Vergara. I think he did fantastic work. You're going to hear something here that you probably shouldn't hear because I misclicked and opened something. Hey, I managed to close it. But yeah, Taira's looked really, really good. He looks like he's putting stuff together. Yasmin Hauerguy's fight against Yasmin Lucindo and against Estela Nunez were very, very good. Natalia Silva has been phenomenal. She embarrassed Jasmine Jasudavicius and then beat Teresa Bleda. Teresa Bleda, I think, in her own right, is going to be very, very good. She just didn't win this year. That's the only reason she's not on those lists. But like she has things you can't teach in terms of physical size and power that could be really, really interesting. And then Michael Morales, probably the weakest resume. You know, beating Adam Fugit and beating Trevin Giles is not amazing. But he stopped both of those guys. Stopping Trevin Giles in the first round is pretty good. Has an amazing athletic background. lots of physical impressive tools, bit of a route striker, bit wooden, but assuming he develops properly, he's also very young, I do believe. He was born in 99, so yeah, he's 23. He's going to be, I think, phenomenal. Raul Rosas Jr., super young, no guarantee he puts it together, but he did look very, very good against Jay Perron. So, yeah, the future is very bright. The new crop of fighters in 2022, great. Also, Tatiana Suarez is coming back. Now, part of me wants to pump the brakes a little bit and say, all right, we saw with TJ Dillashaw that the UFC medical screening process is a joke. You have a fighter there who, coming off of 3 shoulder surgeries, apparently was able to sneak in with a dislocating, popping out shoulder constantly and be the man, be there. And the UFC admitting that they really don't check. So I am hoping Suarez is coming back medically sound and ready to go. But like, this is a woman who kind of is like a Carla Esparza in terms of like base skill set, but like bigger, more powerful, without the hard limitations that Esparza has. And oh my lord, I am so looking forward to her return, because it should be amazing. How old is she again? Tatiana Suarez. She's 8-0 before she took her break. She's 32, so she did lose a lot of time. But this is a woman who beat Nina Nunes, stopped Carlos Esparza, beat Alexa Grasso, beat Viviana Pereira, beat Amanda Bobby Cooper. Very, very, very good run. And beat JJ Aldridge on Tough, which again is a mixed bag, but still fantastic. Great to see her coming back. That's a big deal, and I hope nothing but the best in an already deep and impressive strawweight division. Jake Paul investing into PFL and signing with PFL, it does nothing for me. But it does present an avenue for PFL to grow their brand, their imprint, and rise the profile of a rival promotion to the UFC. You also have one having signed the Amazon deal. And basically what I'm getting at here is that this is probably the most fruitful, fertile environment market for MMA promotions outside of the UFC to actually grow that we have seen in MMA history. I still think we have the wrong... We have problems with almost every one of them. Bellator has certain limitations. PFL, certain limitations. KSW, certain limitations. Ryzen, certain limitations. So it's not... There are problems, and none of these do I believe are going to rival the UFC. But every step towards setting up the conditions for a rival to present itself is good. Because that's the only way we're going to fix some of the biggest problems in MMA, is to have the UFC not have this monopsony power. PEDs were, of course, a big news in 2022. Conor McGregor using PEDs, pretty much admitting it, to heal up from his injury. On one hand, I like the idea that a UFC fighter can take themselves out of the USADA pool, heal up. I like that. I actually really, really do. Because these are guys that are sustaining injuries that will impact them for the rest of their lives in a lot of areas. And the use of certain substances can really help with that. Really change how their lives are going to go post-UFC and during UFC. And avoid things like TJ Dillashaw's shoulder being completely out of its socket. My concern is that you're doing this for Conor McGregor, and you're doing it without a lot of transparency. It took journalists digging up USADA testing reports and asking questions about why Conor McGregor hadn't been tested in so long to really bring this to light. And the problem here is that suggests, much like the domestic violence issues that I talked about before, that we will have one set of rules for stars and one set of rules for everybody else. That's not fair. That's not good for the sport. And that really undoes a lot of the goodness that could come from this. Now, to USADA's credit, they have actually been applying the John Jones pulsing rule to other people. Josh Quinlan, specifically. Maybe this becomes a thing for everybody. I just have my doubts, and I don't have a lot of good faith with the UFC and USADA. But this will be a storyline going forward. It's one I'm really, really interested in. And it's one that I'm interested to see what happens. Obviously. Now, the nothing but negative is the Paddy Pimblett versus Ariel Helwani feud. And Pimblett versus the media, period, I guess. And other people against the media. Josh Thompson with Bellator. John McCarthy with Bellator, to a certain degree. Here's the thing with the whole Paddy Pimblett thing. As a journalist, you should not pay for an interview. Here's something I would suggest. I want anyone who believes that this should be the case to go and watch paid interviews. And note that the questions are not interesting, engaging, or particularly good. And the answers are not particularly good either. It's very performative. It's very, very, very propagandish. And to me, useless. From a journalistic standpoint. It's useless. So the question is, why would you want that to be the case? And of course, the irony of doing this while talking to Dana White on your podcast. Dana White, the ultimate... Here's the thing. The UFC contracts recently got broken down by Bloody Elbow. They literally use the word exploit in the contracts. At multiple times is the word exploit utilized in UFC promotional agreements with fighters. Yet somehow, when you say the UFC exploits fighters, there are actually people who will argue to the contrary. And this is, again, that classic, like, Dana White and the UFC admit to something or state something is true or state that a defense is useless and their fans still use it. It's amazing. I don't care for Ariel Helwani. I've said this a number of times. I do not honestly care for Ariel Helwani's journalistic style. He has his preconceived notions. He has his biases, like any journalist does. He is not my cup of tea. But he did help Paddy Pimblett launch his career. He did. He gave him an outreach to a North American audience at a time where no one wanted to interview Paddy. Ariel was even told by his producers that it was a bad idea. He went out there. He did it. Paddy took advantage of it. That is part of why Paddy is a star now. It's not the only thing. Paddy is the main reason. Paddy's charisma, Paddy's ability to gift a gab, Paddy's ability to make people want to cheer for him and want to see him fight is the key. But he was given a platform by Ariel Helwani. He does not owe Ariel anything for that, but Ariel does not owe him anything to come on the show. It's just ridiculous, this whole thing. If a show is not worth your time, if there is no payoff in utilizing the platform, don't go on it. There you go. So that's another pointless feud. James Krause, Douglas Crosby, and the impact that they have had on UFC or on MMA in 2022 could be massive. Because of course, with James Krause, you have the betting side of the equation. To the point where Ontario, Alberta, and I believe British Columbia stopped betting on the UFC. There's a federal investigation going on. the UFC has parted ways with basically anything to do with James Krause. And honestly, they've stopped using Yanni the Greek nearly as much during this whole controversy. And the good news to this is that hopefully this ends some of the seedier gym behavior, because I don't think coaches should be betting on fights. I particularly don't think coaches should be coaching towards an outcome that is based on, that has anything to do with their bets. And I think a lot of James Krause's corner instructions start to make a lot more sense when you consider that he may have been betting on the fights. And of course, the Derek Minner fight was the worst thing ever. That was, at least in terms of like the closest thing to like a complete worked fight. I'm not saying Minner went out there and took a dive or anything like that, but Minner went out there with a strategy that was not his own and was not going to in any way protect him from the injury that he had sustained. There is no way that fight should have gone on. There you go. And with Douglas Crosby, of course, MMA judging has been a problem for a really, really, really long time. Pretty much since the conception of the sport. And Douglas Crosby, his interviews, by the way, if you can find it, his interviews with Chael Sonnen. I don't necessarily recommend the Chael Sonnen podcast, but his interviews with Chael Sonnen are enlightening as heck. Where this is a guy that, this also is incredibly sad because like Jeff Mullen, who was one of the worst judges for like a long, long time, now runs the Nevada State Athletic Commission. He is the chairman, despite the fact that he has given an interview in the past with Sherdog, I believe it was Sherdog, where he literally admitted to not using the stated judging criteria to judge fights. And Douglas Crosby has essentially done the same. And of course, this came to light with the Paddy Pimblett fight, the Danny Sapatello fight with Rafael Stotts. And yeah, no, something has to change. And it's been suggested that more pay has to be part of the equation, and probably should. But to me, as long as there is not accountability for the judges, this won't be fixed. But I think we finally maybe have had the tipping point where somebody in the commissions and in the promotions maybe are actually going to try to do something. Because previously all we've had is like certain camps refusing to let certain judges judge their fights because of feuds between the judge and the camp, which is insane. Conflict of interest at its finest. So I'm hoping for change. That's my thing. I'm hoping that James Krause, I'm hoping that Douglas Crosby, I'm hoping that other people who are doing the same thing end up paying the price, and that we get changes. And unlike with the Tate case, where like I'm hoping for guilt and therefore victims, there are victims of this whole thing. Like the fighters are victims of poor judging. James Krause's fighters are victims of him. The betting public are to a degree victims of James Krause. They're unquestionably victims. And somebody has to pay. So I don't feel any trepidation in hoping for a guilty verdict there. Also, I don't have to continue to worry about I don't have to continue to wonder why the heck Glory MMA and Fitness, James Krause's gym, is so popular. That also helps me out. Finally, we'll finish off with the last storyline, which is Stephan Bonnar's passing away. First of all, thoughts and prayers, best wishes, good energy to the family and friends of Stephan Bonnar. First up. Second up, unfortunately, we kind of saw this coming. The whirlwind descent of Stephan Bonnar from UFC fighter to bizarro Bellator fighter to pro wrestler to guy ranting about painkillers in a hospital and anti-vaccine stuff is tragic to watch and probably something we're going to see more of, unfortunately, because we're getting to the point where a lot of the fighters that helped build the UFC are now in their 40s, have suffered the brain trauma of an MMA career, and were not remotely compensated well enough to live. Stephan Bonnar particularly hit some bad luck with his, I believe his business getting shut down because of COVID, and I believe his house burnt down. And as far as I can ascertain, the only person who really reached out to help him was like Tyron Woodley. So good on Tyron Woodley. There are other people who said that they reached out to help and he rejected them. That might be true. That may be true. It's the classic, the help you need is not necessarily the help you want. But it kind of goes back to the classic fighter pay debate. And of course, the need to understand CT a lot more. Where does this go? And how there needs to be a safety net. There really does. Because, I mean, with Bonnar, you have a guy that, by the president of the company, own admission, was a massive part of saving the company. Him and Forrest Griffin in that first fight. There were other things. Ken Shamrock coming back to do the Ultimate Fighter finale. That had a big deal. Bringing his WWE clout with him. The Spike TV deal just in general. Obviously a big help. And a big key to growth. But there are a lot of people who are fans of MMA because of that fight. And it's not enough to just give him credit. He should honestly have benefited a lot more financially from the whole thing. And the UFC is doing its best to limit the financial opportunities of fighters so that they can maximize their own. This is a problem. It's something I hope changes. And if anything good can come out of Stephan Bonnar's passing, that would be it. And we'll finish off with a question from Mariah. One moment here while I get her question. Here we go. So here is her question. She has fallen into the Eileen Perez social media grime. And she wants to know, what is the value of a sexy fighter who cannot fight? If you don't know Eileen Perez, she's the Argentinian girl who twerks after her fights. And kind of, that's legitimately her hook. And I don't know if she's necessarily a bad fighter. The only thing I can say is that the only time she has fought somebody with any notoriety, she has lost. The Tamarish Vidal fight, which I believe she got DQ'd in. Could be one of them got DQ'd. I know one of them got DQ'd. Yeah, she got DQ'd for illegal knees. And then the Stephanie Egger fight, where she basically got bossed. She's fighting Haley Cowan, and okay, she is going down to bantamweight at least. And this has kind of been the question because, of course, Kay Hansen kind of fits this mold of someone who I'm not going to say is bad because I had hopes for Kay Hansen, but this kind of idea of like going into MMA, utilizing sex appeal to transition into some other kind of income stream. And it's obviously working. But I do think that so my answer is, I guess, that the benefit is this. There is a thirsty MMA fan base that wants to see girls who is introduced to hot girls through MMA and then follows them to OnlyFans and other private sites. And I'm not going to defend those guys because I don't get it. I have no moral objection to the whole thing. I have no problem with the whole thing. I have no hate for the ladies on this matter. You go get that money. But it's a bit weird to me. The demand, the audience of that is a bit weird to me. I would think that there should be a better way to go about it than going into fighting, being objectively not UFC caliber, taking the CT, because we just talked about Stephan Bonnar dying. Not that any of these ladies seem to have had a long enough career, but that's unnecessary brain trauma. There should be a better way to become essentially kind of like an influencer model, I guess would be the word. And it is a bit weird. But I assume they like to fight. But I don't even know that because Kay Hansen gives me the impression that like she was miserable her entire MMA career. So I don't even know that's true. And I don't think Valerie Laredo from Bellator was particularly keen on it either. So I'll to summarize, it's weird. It definitely is translating into money, but there probably is a better way. There really should be a better way. All right. So that is all. I will be streaming on Tuesday, Mio Dread on Twitch, and it will be the off season of my Gronk baseball team in Super Mega Baseball 3. Check it out. If you want a player on the team, there may be as many as 4 roster spots open. And I'll be back for the preview of the next UFC card. Below, to the left, to the right, above, somewhere, you will find a link tree where you can find this podcast in various different spots: YouTube, Anchor, Spotify, or Acast. You can find my Twitter. You can find my Discord. The Discord is home to my mixed martial arts simulator. It's actually technically a combat sports simulator in general, but I think the MMA part of it is by far the best part of it, where you can make a fighter and go through a mixed martial arts career in the sim. So check that out. And I look forward to talking to you next time and about fights.